when it comes to COVID specifically, when you look at pre-COVID, there really was misalignment between generations because, every individual took the stereotype view of the other generation, didn't understand our lived experience and, lacked knowledge on how to collaborate. And then we also had, as generations, this aimlessness, right? We lacked a personal ikigai that each of us could articulate. But then COVID, again, has bridged this divide, has given us this shared experience. And in fact, what I believe the future is going to look like is generations connected, right? Where we learn to value each other's diverse characteristics, we become better equipped to collaborate, but also where, we have ikigai, where we appreciate each other's sense of purpose. And this in turn helps to generate a sense of shared purpose.
Welcome to International Business Today, where we discuss the most critical issues in international business with today's top academic experts and thought leaders. I'm Paula Caligiuri, a professor in the International Business and Strategy Group at Northeastern University's DeMoore McKim School of Business, the host and sponsor of this podcast. Today, I'm so happy to be joined by Rachele Focardi. Rachele is a leading expert in generational diversity, and she is the author of a fantastic book, Reframing Generational Stereotypes. Great book, absolutely fantastic book. Rachele, welcome to International Business Today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was so excited to be speaking with you today about generational differences. We know that generations, they're a culture, right? They have their norms, behaviors, attitudes, motivations, values. Tell us about some of the work you're doing in generational differences.
Absolutely, Paula. It's a pleasure to talk about it. I mean, this is a topic that has been a love affair for me for the last 20 years, and it's finally picking up so much. I think if we look at what's going on in the world today, especially in the world of work, we have for the first time in history 5 generations working together. We hear about our baby boomers, our Gen X, our millennials, our Gen Zs, but we still have traditionalists, the ones that came even before baby boomers still going strong, particularly when we look at, boards or executive management. And of course, each generation comes with its own mindsets, its own behaviors, its own way of thinking. And what organizations are starting to realize now is that the power of being able to combine all the different generational strengths is really what can bring their business into the future. But unfortunately, when you have 5 generations working alongside each other, things can get complicated. And the reality is that there are a lot of frictions in the workplace that if companies can only find a way to address so they can foster a real culture of intergenerational collaboration, I believe they're going to see a level of progress that is unprecedented.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this. Like you said, 5 generations. It's akin to us talking about 5 different national cultures working together, right? It's the same type of thing. But I want to step back just around the idea of a generation, because years ago, we used to talk about generations as being very country specific because they defined a group or an experience that a group of people went through time. Where were they during their defining moments? And those differ depending on which country you were in. Is it now more, I guess, the same around the world because we're experiencing things globally, or is there still country specific generation?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question, and I get asked that question all the time. As you said, Paula, generations are defined by large-scale events. So what happened is that prior to millennials, they emerged across different parts of the world at different times, with many of the defining traits differing from region to region or even country to country. But, aside from varying socioeconomic realities, if we think about it, until the late 90s, the world was still relatively siloed, right? So young people in one country didn't know much or anything at all about, peers across the globe and what they were living or experiencing. So in short, there was very little information transfer. And this is why when we look at the millennial generation in particular, they emerged in North America, which I consider ground zero, in 1981. But according to a number of generational studies, they didn't actually reach Europe and Asia until approximately the late 80s. But now what happened after millennials is, of course, globalization and technology technology. So what globalization and technology have done is they have bridged generation gaps between countries and cultures, both in terms of time and also in terms of defining characteristics. So if we look at the emergence of a connected world with, correlated economic trends, content, internet, pop culture, this led to generations developing relatively similar mindset and values that led to strong global cohesiveness. So what that means is that, even as we stand in a time of regionalization as a form of deglobalization, I think we can comfortably assume that what many millennials and Gen Z are experiencing, and many of their fundamental traits, are actually consistent across most developed countries. And in fact, when I run generational studies across the world, I see very little differences in how, especially the new generations, define themselves, what they find important, what they want out of the workplace, across the world. I look at data from Japan and it's very similar to data from South Africa. So I think, with technology and globalization, generations are more aligned than ever. Of course, we need to still, leave some wiggle room for dominant, cultural traits and idiosyncrasies, but they're definitely more connected than ever.
Absolutely. I think you and I both, we define culture very similarly. It's like, look at it, it's not just because you were born in a certain country that you have a culture. It's all of the socializing agents that have influenced you. And that includes your generation and your profession and your religion and your lots of other things. So it's important, but you're right. Generation is such a big one. So let's talk about that. We've got 5 generations in the workforce today.
Yes.
How do you help companies help them work together more effectively so they can harness the benefits of those different generations?
Well, I think what a lot of organizations don't understand is that they have, an incredible, tool, power tool at their disposal, but they also have a lot of challenges that they're not facing. Every time I talk to organizations, they tell me that the number one challenge they have right now is engaging talent. And then when I talk to talent within organizations, they come to me and they say that, well, I'm often disengaged. And the reason why I'm disengaged, and one of the top reasons why I want to leave my company, is because of intergenerational conflicts. And in fact, it's interesting. I ran a study across the world to understand how different generations experience working together. And, over 80% say that they experience intergenerational challenges or conflicts on a daily or weekly, basis. So for many of them, generational conflicts are very real and they're very hard to overcome.
So Rachele, tell us more about what those challenges are among the generations, what individuals are saying, what companies are saying.
Well, I think the challenges that generations are facing, are very similar to, the challenges generations has faced with each other throughout history, right? It's interesting. Actually, George Orwell said every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that came before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. So this has always been a case, with generations all throughout history. And in fact, a lot of the biggest transformation comes exactly from the younger generations wanting to change things and the way things have always been. Now, I think this has become more relevant in the workplace after the millennials, because what happened with millennials is that, prior to millennials, actually, we still had many generations in the workplace, maybe not 5, but you still had generations with different mindsets, behaviors, and opinions. But because organizations operated mostly with a hierarchical model, the younger generations probably had a lot to say, but they couldn't say it because they had to follow that chain of command. And then what happened with millennials is they led to the demise of the hierarchy, right? And they led to flat organizations where everybody's expected to have a voice, where it's a lot more meritocratic. And so what happens all of a sudden is you have a lot of generations, a lot of people with different mindsets and behaviors that all need to express their opinions. And this is where the challenge happens. So the biggest friction that organizations are facing within the workplace is this idea of, new age versus traditional mindset. I am new, I am full of ambition, I'm trendy, I'm hungry, I want to make a difference. But look at these old generations. They're comfortable with the way things have always been. They're comfortable with the status quo. They're resistant to change, and they're holding me back. And this is really at the root of intergenerational challenges.
Wow. And so that must play out in a way that, is it that you call them traditionalists? So those senior managers, it sounds like globally, are looking at the junior folks saying, whoa, you don't have the experience to have that much of an opinion or that much of an influence on whatever it is you're trying to influence. Is that the source of the friction from the more senior folks to the more junior?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, traditionally, there's not many of them in actual workplace. I would say it's probably more, the baby boomers and the early Gen X. But I think what has happened, Paula, is this. What happened is that, up until the millennials entered the workplace was not supposed to be something that you enjoyed. I mean, I remember I was told by my university professor when she asked me, what I was going to do after I graduated. And I said, well, I'm still not sure what I'm going to like. And her response was, hey, people that do what they like have hobbies. They don't have jobs. They don't have careers, right? So what are you thinking? And so the idea was that, there were certain, behavioral norms around how you would be expected to, think about work and how you were expected to think about leadership and behave and so on and so forth. And then when the millennials rise up, obviously they demanded a change. If we think about the millennial generation, we see a generation that, saw their parents divorce because dad was never around. They saw that they had to put, all their dreams away, tucked away because they had no vacation days, saving money for retirement, not having enough time to spend with the kids. And then what happened is 2008 happened. And, the parents lost all their money. They lost their job. They lost any chance of getting that life back. And so millennials came in and said, the workplace needs to be different. It's no longer the place we're going to suffer through at the hands of really strict bosses, but it's a place where we want to be able to thrive. And the good thing about this is they led to this workplace revolution that companies jumped on. And in fact, I mean, you and I were, collaborating very strongly, Paula, back in 2006 when millennials entered the workplace and started demanding change. And companies reacted. And this was fantastic. They realized that the workplace, as we knew it then, had to change. But what I think they failed to do, companies, is in an effort to kind of create these new environments that would be millennial friendly, I think they failed to do one thing is they failed to explain to millennials that, yes, you come in with a lot of ideas for how the workplace must be, and we're going to meet those demands for the most part. But the workplace is also full of people that were there before you who lived very different experiences. And likewise, I think companies fail to explain to the existing generations why this generation was coming in so strongly and why so many changes were made around this generation that would ultimately benefit everybody. And so the feeling on the part of the older generations was that these new generations were kind of shoved down their throats. Why do we have to change? Why did we have it so hard? And now, I'm supposed to rethink my idea of leadership, and I'm supposed to become the perfect coach and mentor, and they should be so, entitled, and, we should pay so much attention to them. And so this created to a level of friction that I think is a real pity, because it did stop, and it did, I think, halt progress to a certain extent. And that reality is still very much there. We see it with the stereotypes, like K-boomer versus strawberry generation and so on and so forth. So I think this is where organizations need to go in and do what they failed to do in 2006, 2007, and it's help generations reconnect.
So this is absolutely fascinating, because I can see it just on college campuses, right? The same idea. What do we do to solve it? What I know you work with a lot of organizations around the world on solving this issue. What works?
Well, I mean, companies ask me this all the time. They say, what do we do? How do we throw generations together and expect the best outcomes? And what I think companies often fail to do, what they don't understand, is that the very first step in addressing and bridging this generational divide is to help generations understand each other. Cross-generational awareness is fundamental. I have so many companies that come to me and say, well, you know what, Rachele, we've done it. We've created programs, we've created initiatives and activities. We put generations together and we gave them a chance to collaborate. And you know what? At the end of the day, things didn't work out, which proves once again that generations cannot work together. And what I always tell them is that it's almost like trying to save a marriage that has fundamentals levels of misunderstanding at its roots by telling the couple to go on a date, right? It may spice things up a little bit, for a little bit. It may be interesting, but ultimately and fundamentally, unless we really understand where we come from, we're just going to go back, to the old ways. And then we're going to come back and the narrative will be, see, we tried and it's just not working. So I think what companies fail to do is either they fail to address generational diversity altogether, So I hear so many companies say, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to offend anybody. Generational diversity is not real. We're just stereotyping people. And they refuse to acknowledge that generations are time capsules. We're just more than age. We are, we bring with us the mindset, the behaviors, the parenting styles, the leadership style, the office norms, the pop culture, like all the things that we grew up with and that shaped us. So that's the first thing, is failure to recognize. And the second thing is they don't do anything to help generations understand one another. One thing I found out, Paula, and I think you're going to be mind blown by this, but when I run studies with organizations, 96% of employees across generations tell me that they know very little or nothing at all about the contexts that shaped the mindsets and behaviors of their generationally different colleagues. So fundamentally, we want generations to work together effectively, but at the end of the day, they don't know anything about each other. And so I think if companies don't help generations understand each other first, and understand the context that shape these mindsets and behaviors, we're just going to keep falling back to the negative stereotype or the bias or whatever, because we just don't know how to explain behaviors that we don't understand and we don't know where they originate from. So I think that's really the most critical aspect, and one that companies often skip past. And then unfortunately, that just brings them back.
It's so interesting because it parallels the work I've done in cultural agility, and you and I have chatted about this
Yes.
before. That there's really two pieces of building cultural agility. One is the awareness building. You have to know what could be potentially different and why before you'll ever go into a situation and see it and understand it and appreciate it. So awareness, all the things
Yeah,
you're describing, why are generations behaving in a certain way? But then there's the other piece of it. It's that competency piece. It's the ability to have the concepts like humility and perspective taking
exactly.
and relationship building, the ability to find similarity with one another based on a shared interest in a sport or a hobby or a interest or a vacation, whatever, so that we start to see that we do have things in common that aren't different.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I 100% agree with you, Paula, and that's unfortunately the challenge. I mean, the good thing is 99% of employees say that they really want to work with other generations. And to be honest, in a post-COVID world, there's nothing that generations want more than to be seen and to feel relevant. And in fact, the level of disengagement that companies are experiencing throughout the organization that leads to, phenomenons like the Great Resignation or silent quitting, are all fundamentally, come from the fact that I don't feel seen, I don't feel valued, I don't feel heard, I don't feel able to contribute. And this is equally the case for older generations who tell me, I'm intimidated. Despite my years of experience, I see these young generations whizzing past me. And, I'm intimidated by the fact that I don't use technology as effectively, or maybe I don't learn as fast, or maybe I don't have as much energy. And I don't want to be seen as obsolete. I want to know that everything I've experienced throughout my life, can be passed down to the young generations in preparing them for leadership. And I want to go out with a bang. And then you have the young generation saying, we have this strong pressure to make the world a better place, and we want to be able to make an impact, and we want to be able to contribute. But, we're intimidated and afraid that we'll be stuck doing menial stuff just because we don't have the experience. And so fundamentally, you have a workforce that is really, longing to connect, is really longing to come out of those silos and find each other. And the upside for organizations is that, there's no diverse team that can lead to a greater level of innovation, a greater coverage of blind spots in decision making than a team that is comprised of different generations. So the impact of being able to bring generations together and collaborate effectively is just incredible to organizations, and fundamentally that's what generations really want.
Yes. So you mentioned, I so want to solve this for our listeners. So you you mentioned the training that you do to help individuals see kind of what gave a generation, what defined a generation, why they do have the values and behaviors that they have. What else are organizations doing in addition to that awareness building? Is there anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a kind of a three-prong approach. I think the first one, of course, is well, even before that, you have recognizing that generational diversity is diversity, and it needs to be, included in DEI agendas and worked with. The other thing as well, of course, like I said, is the cross-generational awareness piece. Understanding, helping also leaders understand that being able to manage and work alongside, four different generations is probably going to become one of the most in demand skills for leaders across generations and seniority levels. So, I do a lot of multi wow workshops, multi generational ways of working, where you really help leaders understand and explore, their own biases, empathize with the different generation, understand how to motivate and engage the different generations, and so on and so forth. So, this is really important because 86% of senior leaders are in a phase right now where they really want to be able to rethink their leadership style and align it more to the needs of a multi-generational workforce. So, that is fundamental. And then, of course, there's a series of incredible initiatives that companies are putting together, aside from obviously, finding ways to get generations to interact, inside and outside of work. But you have some incredible examples with, for example, shadow boards. Shadow boards is an amazing example of how organizations are capitalizing on the unique power of different generations to drive the business forward. I have a great case study in my book by Group M. And Group M in India in particular, kind of spearheaded or kind of, launched this idea of shadow board by saying, well, let me think. So we have a problem, or two problems. The first challenge that we have is that, talent nowadays, especially young talent, they need to be exposed to senior leadership. They need to be exposed to, projects of strategic importance to the business if we are to keep them and retain them. So that's the first problem. The second problem that we have or challenge is that, in the advertising and media industry, our consumers are getting younger and younger. And the people that make the decisions are usually the ones who belong to the older generations. So they have an incredible amount of institutional knowledge, but they lack connection to the, young consumers. And so what the company said is this, they said, okay, what if we actually create an executive committee of young talent? So we're going to look at our top performers. We're going to find a number of, 12, 15 kids who just joined the organization, who haven't been with us for more than a year. And we're going to create an executive committee of young generations. And they called it the YCO, the youth committee. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this youth committee works alongside the executive committee for every project that is of strategic importance to the business. And so what this does is it helps cover blind spot in decision making. It removes, the bottlenecks of executive leadership trying to find out from, the youngest levels of the organization how things work. And it gives the different generations an opportunity to learn from one another. And in fact, many of the incredible programs that they launched, from the Group M Champions League, which was an amazing upskilling program, these were all ideas that were created by the youth committee by taking this mandate from the executive committee. And on top of that, there is opportunity to do two-way mentoring. So I learn from you something while I learn something, where you learn something from me. And this has proven to really drive, significant levels of innovation throughout the company, but also, give the opportunity to the young generations to not only be exposed to leadership, but to use their ability to use technology effectively and coming up with simple solutions to really make a significant impact within the organization. So this is just an example of how, collaborative decision making is really making it at the very, very top of many organizations. And Group M is just one of them. You have many other companies that are doing that.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful example of cultural humility too. The ability to say, look, I am really good at this, but I don't know how to do it in this context. So for those senior leaders in Group M to be able to say, look, we are really good at understanding our technical world from all it for everything it was, but now we need to morph it over into a client base that we don't fully understand. So to work together, it's just that it's and the more we're talking, the more I'm realizing that this is 100% the cultural agility piece. It's the understanding the awareness and building those competencies in order to put that awareness to
Oh,
leverage it.
absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and there's another, great example I think that you're particularly going to love. And this is something because, I mean, of course, putting together a shadow board is something that not every organization has the ability to do that quickly. It requires a lot of commitment and so on and so forth. But, there's another great example, when it comes to collaborative decision making. And a great case study of that is actually Siemens in my book. And Siemens was a fantastic example of a leader that realized that in order to drive significant innovation, he just couldn't rely on the kind of traditional, hierarchy-based model of the past, but he needed to be able to combine, different skills in the form of generations, in the forms of multicultural, employees. And so what happened in that case study, and it's really my favorite, is, the head of talent acquisition for Siemens had this idea that he needed to redefine and redesign the entire talent acquisition function, and HR gave him the opportunity to do that, but gave him only 1 year. And so he said, wow, if we rely on, exclusively Caucasian, baby boomer, German engineers, we're going to get a lot of great value, but we're not going to move as fast as we need to move. And so he decided that the way to tackle this was to put together a multicultural and multi-generational team where he combined the baby boomer, German engineer alongside the young Gen Z from India, alongside many others. And the thing that he said is, I brought these people into this project, and I made a few things very clear. The first thing is there's no hierarchy here. There is no titles. Everybody's exactly at the same level. The second thing was everybody is an equal expert at exactly what they've been hired to do. So you're all experts here, on different things. And then what he said is he did, I focused on really articulating a vision, right? Because at the end of the day, we all want to be successful. And the minute that the team understood that it was up to us working together to be successful, and there was no or right or wrong answer to how we address the project, but we had to come up with that answer together, they started to collaborate. Of course, he goes through how many challenges that created at the beginning with everybody wanted to prove that their way of thinking was the best way of thinking. But what he did say that struck with me is, when everybody understood that they were an expert at exactly what they were hired to do. And when they realized that they had to rely on each other based on experiences, competencies, skill sets, mindsets, as opposed to years of experience, that's when the magic happened. And he said, which is exactly what you just said to me, Paula, is, I realized, for example, the younger generations use technology effectively and came up with very simple solutions. And so we let them do that. The older employees, on the other hand, understood the business very well, could anticipate roadblocks, knew how to get stakeholders engaged, and they focused on that. And the beautiful thing is that, in this kind of cycle of working together where everybody was able to put what they were best at, they managed to not only achieve great innovation in the allotted amount of time, so they did complete the project in 1 year, but they also learned so much about each other, in the way that they worked together. And what he told me was that when the project was, dismantled because they achieved, and accomplished the goal, nobody wanted to go back to the traditional way of working. So when it was time for the older generations to go back to being the boss, and it was time for nobody wanted to do that. Not only they all wanted to stay in that model where they felt relevant, where they felt, like they were contributing, where they felt like they were learning from each other, but even people that were marginally involved with the project, they wanted to be a part of this great team. And this is an example of something that any company can do. You don't need to have a big strategic mandate. But if you're working on a problem or on a project, try to bring in 3-4 generations, tell them that they're all equals in the way that they address that project and see what they can come up with. And then if you showcase that internally, I think that it's going to start leading to a lot of transformation in how projects are, staffed and yeah.
It's one of those key approaches to that cultural integration or cultural agility is cultural integration, that idea of taking ideas and approaches from multiple ways and creating something new and unique. And that team doesn't look like any other team, but they're unique in and of themselves. So that's a really great example. Rachele, I know you've done so much work and many research studies, and a lot of what you found, especially in your post-COVID research, has been around kind of generations across the board, reframing around purpose and the need to really connect with their purpose at work. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, purpose is a big word. I mean, we're hearing about purpose everywhere, but I really do believe that purpose is going to be the glue that holds generations together. If we look at, why generations have had conflicts with each other in the workplace over the years, is because fundamentally, as we said earlier, they're shaped by large scale events, and these large scale events happen during their formative years. So fundamentally, all the big experiences that shape us, we experience in silos because we simply don't exist at the same time. And so this has been a big contributor to generations feeling disconnected. But what happened with COVID, I think, is really magical in the sense that, almost like Haley's Comet, I tend to say, it created this kind of unprecedented scenario, an unexpected one, where every generation, almost anywhere in the world, in the workplace, experienced the same thing at the same time. And so this brought generations closer together than ever. I ran a study, which is called the Post-Pandemic Workplace Study, to understand how different generations experienced working together, working during the pandemic, how it changed their outlook on work and career and, each other and team collaboration and all these things. And what came out really loud and clear is that generations, thanks to COVID, despite all its, of course, disruption and everything that it came with, but, it really did bridge the generational divide in ways that we could have never expected. Purpose, as you said, was one of the biggest conflict creator between generation because of this idea that, look at me, the young generations, we want to create a new path, with successful impact. We want to be aligned to, sustainable development goals. We feel it upon ourselves to make the world a better place. Look at climate change. Look at, poverty, inequality. So there's this big sense of purpose that the young generations have. And there was always this perception or this idea the older generations are just not purposeful. And I think what young generations fail to realize is that actually, for example, baby boomers were one of the most purposeful generations. I mean, they were the first hippies. They were the first to, to get in a square and protest about, the environment. They wanted to change institutions. They're the first that were called narcissists and the first that came up to change things. But of course, what happened is that they needed to be careerists, right? So they entered the workplace. They got caught in the grind. They enter workplaces that didn't really enable your sense of purpose or even allowed you to talk about it, right? And so, they kind of lost themselves. Right. And then what happened with COVID is all of a sudden the sense of purpose got reignited. And in fact, in my study, it shows very clearly that the number one way in which the pandemic influenced the view of career, according to the different generations, is that every generation is now equally saying, I feel the need to realign my career with a greater sense of purpose. And this is even stronger among baby boomers and Gen Xers than it is among millennials and Gen Z. So all of a sudden, this is something that generations have in common. Baby boomers say, the sense of purpose has been reignited in me. I had lost it somewhere along the way, but COVID made us realize how transient things are. It makes me want to feel like I'm part of the solution. And so now I'm better equipped than anybody to enable purpose in my younger employees or team members. So I think this is something that is absolutely fantastic, because if we can learn as an organization to understand that purpose is now equally important to everybody and understand a little bit more about how different generations define purpose, and then help them, especially the older generations, re-articulate purpose for themselves so that they can enable purpose in others and then align themselves and the team around a sense of shared purpose. I think organizations can not only move forward successfully, but they can really become part of the solution and really align themselves and their DNA to something that is more meaningful. So I think purpose is going to be the big topic going forward, and companies really need to think about how they use this incredible new development and how they use purpose to actually bring generations together and drive the business forward.
It's terrific to know that as tragic as COVID was, there is a little silver lining, and that is a shared experience that unites all of the generations, and a reframe around for organizations around creating purpose for their employees. Rachele, this has been absolutely wonderful. I just have one last question, just your parting advice to the professionals out there who are listening, are mostly international business individuals, people who aspire to or already are global leaders. So what would you, as a global leader, as someone who's worked all around the world, what would you advise?
Well, I think what I would advise is I mean, I think that, the biggest and most important task, I think, for any leader out there or any senior leader is to prepare the next generation for leadership. And I think if we look at the workplace over the last, especially, 15, 16 years, there's been a lot of competition between generations. And I think it's the time now for us to create a new way of working together. We have an incredible plethora of experiences and mindsets, and we have, the blessing, and we have the responsibility to work alongside people that are coming into the workplace now with, a lot of energy and a lot of ambition. And I think if we start to, instead of shying away from the idea of generational diversity or generations, we start looking at ourselves, for all the superpowers that we can bring to the table and align those strengths to the strengths of other generations to come together and do something meaningful together. We can really pass down our legacy in ways that, we're not able to do otherwise. So, I think there's a fantastic quote, Paula, that says, global crises that crush existing orders and overturn long-held norms can pave the way for new systems, structures, and values to emerge and take hold. And then it says, without such devastation to existing systems and practices, leaders and population are generally resistant to major changes or to giving up some of their sovereignty to new organizations or rules. And I think that COVID really was one of these global crises that crushed existing orders. And it is paving ways for new systems. And I think these new systems need to involve, every generation working together collaboratively. Over the last 2,000 years, our world has been run by the older generations. Prior to that, our kings and queens were nothing short of teenagers. But I think we're really being given the opportunity to, reevaluate and re-understand and reappreciate everything that each of us can contribute and pave and redefine a way forward that is truly collaborative, and that it allows for all of us to bring our best powers into the game. And so I think that will really be the secret, I think, to not only, helping organizations grow, but frankly, to saving the world.
Yeah, and the great advice is certainly there are solutions out there. We as leaders can make a difference in our organizations that will
Absolutely.
make us work together. Rachele, thank you so much for being a part of International Business Today. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us for today's episode of International Business Today. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your network. As always, we'd love to hear from you.